myself to talk about the 12 classes of the upcoming release. There's a lot more than the original game, which was just 7 by comparison, though having said that, it appears we're aware of 8 in good detail, with the remaining 4 being pretty well known ones from the original game. Not to mention, there's also the concept of ascendancy, so those are subclasses for each and every class, so the main class chooses between 3 subclasses to then work into those are ascendancies. Also in PoE 2, we have the new dual specialization system, letting you work in 2 different kind of skill tree setups to swap between when you swap weapons. All of that might sound intimidating, so I just want to give you a video that gives you a kind of base idea of a class and its vibe, the main options and concepts, so you can go in with an idea of what you might want to look into more first. So to begin with, I need to tell you about the classes of Path of Exile and how they're a little bit weird. It's entirely possible to create a spellcasting warrior, despite that being backwards in the nature of the concept. Any class can use any skill in the game, as well as the entire list of weapons, so that's why it's possible. There are some restrictions you need to fill to achieve that, but it's just that there's no lock preventing you from doing that if you want. So classes in Path of Exile are essentially just your starting point in that big skill tree. They define your class in a straightforward and obvious way. And if you want to be a warrior to just be a warrior, then that's going to be a great way to achieve that class fantasy. You'll just start the skill tree in the strength section, which naturally will be closer to the passives that are going to enhance gameplay tied to that concept. But it's also possible for your warrior to then transition into other build concepts, maybe not typically warrior in theme. It's just one of the really cool core features of the game that I guess I need to highlight for a video like this. So let's now run down the list. Now, like I said, 4 of the 12 aren't currently shown in any proper depth and detail. We do have a lot to say for the other 8, but again, the 4 that are less shown are ones we kind of know about from PoE 1 anyway. So starting with the strength classes, we have Warrior and Marauder, which somewhat blend into each other more than other classes right now. It seems the Warrior is going to take parts of the original Marauder and goes a different direction with it. And I think this looks like a very beginner-friendly version of that concept, since you're going to deal great damage while dealing your own, kind of being pretty tanky to forgive those mistakes. So the Warrior is a more straightforward class, physical damage with heavy hits, and a lot of stunning capabilities. It's also going to be very tanky and mostly a melee fighter, though we have seen things enhanced with fire, using volcanic fissures to spread out bursts of fire that reactivate with fire on following uses. But compared to the original Marauder, it looks a lot more mobile, moving forward with momentum during many of the attacks. So naturally, I'll expect ascendancies that increase survivability, control, or just raw damage output. On the other hand, for pure strength, we have the Marauder, which was the original pure strength class of PoE 1. Separating this from the warrior class seems a bit more vague, like I said, especially with what we've seen on this, which is very little. But from the original concept, we can look at the ascendancies, allowing you to become the ultimate tank with a Juggernaut, lean into blind rage with the Berserker, or Chieftain, which is more about dealing lots of element damage alongside your typical totems. So if we were going to separate the two, I could imagine Marauder and Warrior, one being the more physical, bloodthirsty one, and the other being more tribal, like that Chieftain approach to the concept. So the key differences between them will probably be shown in those ascendancies. It's just a question of what went to the Warrior and what went to the Marauder. Next, we have our pure dexterity classes though, Ranger and the Huntress. For the Ranger, we have that perfect kiter who can fight from far while dealing massive AoE damage if we look at PoE 1. Leaning into the bow concept, you fire off volleys of arrows, weave in lots of element damage like lightning to enhance that, while relying on your great mobility to avoid damage or position the enemies for a maximum output, while playing at medium or further range generally. If you focus more on single target blasts, or instead lean into poison for damage over time, you can find completely different systems to manage and playstyles there. So if you like the idea of being a classic Ranger, this is probably a great starting class for you. On the other hand, for the pure dex option, we have the Huntress, who actually focuses on spears to begin with. With a smaller shield as a defensive tool, you're actually going to be lining up foes for kind of penetrating spear throws. This will be a mix of up close or distance fighting though, because you can still use it as an effective melee weapon, kind of bouncing in close or far away based on the setup. We've seen combinations of fast thrusts chained together, leaps back, and then potent spear throws that can weave in different elements like lightning or fire. The lightning was shown to split and spread, while the fire was kind of waving out from the center of the throw. The leaps that get you in or out also seem to benefit the class for perks of being in close for a period of time, then away, then in, then out, not spending too long either way. That brings us to pure intelligence classes though, those being the witch and the sorceress. Starting with the witch then, we have the occult minion user. That's like your pure summoner class concept. And in particular for theme though, this is a necromancer, so the undead variety. The core concept here will be to summon armies of dead, empowering them, playing like a tactician yourself around the battlefield, rather than being the main source of damage directly. Now interestingly, the witch is also defined by a second resource system beyond mana called spirit. And we spend that to summon, basically. Therefore, the more spirit you have, the more summons you can have out at one time. These seem to be straightforward in concept at first look, tanky warriors, mages, archers, and more. Thankfully though, there's real quality of life for the summons, allowing you to have direct control over them for skills and movement options. They also revive themselves, they'll summon automatically, on top of even more temporary summons you can work in on top of those. So man, Diablo 4, please learn something. The other pure intelligence class though is of course the sorceress. I think this will hit for any pure spellcaster enjoyer, weaving between the classic elements of lightning, fire, and ice, as well as chaos, dealing the damage directly yourself. PoE 1 would have you turn to Witch originally for this idea, but now we have the Sorceress, we can separate them, having Witch being more of a summoner. So I really like how they've separated them in this way. Interestingly though, as shown a while back, the specific staffs that you have can have spells tied to them, allowing for free casts instead of having to manually get in there with your weak little stick when you're out of mana. With the dual specialization concept though, they use the Sorceress to show off that concept. The player would use one staff to freeze and set up the foe, then swap to another staff to suddenly have your skill tree swap and your skills be more lightning based to work in unison, swapping between the mid-fight kind of setup and spend. Very cool stuff. That brings us though to the hybrid classes, which have their main attributes balanced between two. That could be strength and dex, intelligence and dex, and then finally strength and intelligence. Let's start with strength and dex for this then, with my first class in PoE 1, the duelist. The duelist was classically using a sword and shield, or a two-handed one, or dual wielding, like a Roman gladiator feel, able to dish out cleave attacks while swapping stances for maybe better AoE or potential bleed focuses. Now unfortunately this is one of the four we've not seen a lot of in PoE 2, but again I expect similar vibes for this one. A skilled fighter that's not going to tank a lot of hits directly to the face, so you'll move faster, you'll attack faster, you'll manage the fight. If we consider the original ascendancies, you pick between Slayer, Gladiator, and Champion. Champion would use banners and a taunt system to control the fight. Gladiators would use kind of bleed focus playstyles for damage over time, while Slayer would be max offense, surviving through leech while dealing big hits through crits. Compared to that, we have our new class, the Mercenary, as the other hybrid strength and dex. A super cool concept here though, of using a mix of different crossbows and grenades to set up and manage situations. With a variety of crossbow types to use, you have different firing modes for every situation, like machine gun fire, sniping with penetrating shots, explosions with the underbarrel launch grenades, or the hilarious shotgun crossbow. In its highlight video, they also focused on another new mechanic, which is WASD movement, while using the mouse to actually aim instead of click to move. This allows you to carefully position and move and aim and fire at the same time. So move in close and aim with the shotgun to spread into a pack, or drag them back in a line to snipe through them with a penetrating sniper shot. On top of the weapons, you also have different ammos and attachments, be that different elements or armor piercing shots. So as an example they gave us, they would freeze foes and then swap to armor piercing shots to shatter them. So you want to outthink the situation, maximize your damage based on what you're facing. That's the Mercenary. Next up then, we have the intelligence and dex hybrids. That's Shadow and Monk. Now unfortunately we've seen little of Shadow, so we look to the original in PoE 1 again, as a mix of daggers and traps. It's an assassin concept to bounce in and around a fight, never trying to tank the hits. Looking back at the original ascendancies then, we have Assassin, Saboteur, and Trickster. Basically big bursts through crit, leaning into your traps and explosives, or going into damage over time. No matter what, you'll be super agile, high damage, and somewhat made of paper. So fast-paced, clever gameplay, that's Shadow. On the other hand, we have Monk. Grab your quarterstaff and weave in a surprising amount of element-based setup and spend, freezing enemies to shatter them, or using marks to execute low-health enemies instantly. That then builds up charges to enhance the power of your abilities, adding new effects to them. You're mobile with a lot of control over your enemies, while building up that potent power to unleash at the right time. The mobility sims baked into a lot of the abilities, letting you close the gap pretty much instantly. So that should be important then while you're managing the enemies, to then suddenly appear next to one that's low, execute it, and power up the next setup even more. So a master of yourself and the elements. Finally, we have our last two classes, and the last hybrid type, strength and intelligence. For that, we can start with the classic concept, the Druid, a shapeshifter that turns into different forms to deal physical, powerful damage, while becoming, say, tankier, if not as tanky as the warrior type, with the bear, while casting spells that will revert you to the human form to weave in some elemental ranged help that's pretty cool in terms of the setup, but also really cool in the way that it automatically shape shifts you based on the type of ability you're about to use. So if you press a bear ability, you'll automatically turn into a bear. It's all nature based though, so for the spells, we've got earth related stuff like quakes and volcanoes, alongside your classic lightning. We saw a lot of the tanky bear for swipes and slams, charges, reliable AoE CC, and even some little wolf summons if you want to go more companion based route. The thing is, in teased footage, they've only really shown the bear form, so we do expect others, we just haven't seen them. But as a cool bit of synergy, we've seen how the human form can open up little volcanoes, and then you've got the earth-shaking slams of the bear to reactivate them over and over. As another detail, we had it explained that the bear rage mechanic causes brighter and brighter runes to glow on the form of the bear, increasing your damage the more you attack with bear skills back to back. So that hints to me maybe a shapeshift focus build could be a concept too. But either way, I think this hits the nail on the head for the Druid fantasy in a way that I find, say, Diablo 4's just doesn't. But for class number 12, we refer now to a classic, the Templar, your paladin type, as another mix of strength and intelligence. Unfortunately, is another with little to see of, but again, an original class does mean we can assume a lot from the original version PoE 1. What we do see then is a heavy armor user wielding a shield and a fun weapon, the flail. But looking back to the original ascendancies, that'll tell us a lot. So there we had Inquisitor, the Hierophant, and the Guardian, allowing for element or holy based focuses, auras to benefit the group, able to stand on its own or be really helpful to the team. So very simply, it's a classic paladin with a caster, aura, or tanky nature to consider between. But there you have it, that's our known roster of classes and the general base concepts and details of each. We're going to have a lot of new information coming out regularly in the lead up to release, even this week as I make this video. So expect lots of coverage into the lead up of the launch